What was your "oh crap, this person is a complete creeper" moment when meeting a total stranger? Story 1. Once upon a time, I was chatting with a guy online. We'd been messaging for a couple of months at this point, and he seemed normal. We agreed to meet up for coffee. The coffee portion went great, no red flags, and he seemed really great. So we agreed to go back to my place to watch a movie. Previous to us meeting up, I tried to have an intimate talk with him about likes and dislikes. He shut it down quickly, saying he wants to get to know me first, which was cool. I totally respect that. As soon as we walked through my door, he attempted to make out with me. I would have been fine with a kiss if I was expecting it. I've even been known to put out on a first date, but I was not ready for the attack of his mouth against mine. I shoved him away, and we were staring at each other awkwardly for a moment, and he asked me to use my restroom. I agree and point him down my hallway. I have not moved from the door. I am trying to reflect on where the miscommunication was, and I am also thinking he just needs a moment to collect himself after the awkward rejection. He walks out of my bathroom, not a clothing in sight, walks into my bedroom, lies on my bed in fetal position, and tells me he called his friends to come join us. Internally, I was freaking out. I do not know where to go from here, but I didn't want to continue this journey with him or his friends. So I said, "No thanks, and please don't call your friends." This guy stands up and says, "Oh, okay," gets dressed and leaves. "Oh, okay," like I was rejecting a cup of tea and not his on-display back door. I lock my door, and I call up my friend and make them stay on the phone with me the rest of the day, just in case anyone shows up or comes back. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I was talking to this guy I met while traveling. I was into him too. Honestly, he was a dreamboat, and our personalities clicked in a big way. I was house-sitting for my grandpa for a few days. We exchanged some selfies. I sent some of me walking the dogs and stuff. He got quiet for about a day, but no big deal. It was early on. I went to answer the door one evening, and it was him. He drove to my grandpa's house with info he gleaned from the selfies. He drove straight from Austin, Texas to Kansas City, Missouri. I bet he thought that was super romantic. Rom-coms and the like have taught men some really terrible things. Sure, though it's not as prevalent or serious. A man ignoring no or going further and showing up uninvited crosses the line into stalking, and that's terrifying and completely unacceptable. Story 3. When I was in college, I was waiting for my food at Arby's, and a random older man struck up a conversation with me. He asked me if I was a student, where I lived, where my family was from, if I had a girlfriend, if she lived with me, and how much I was paying for rent. He then told me that he often rented rooms at his house to students for cheap if they helped with chores. He then turned to the people behind the counter and started screaming profanities at them about how long he had been waiting. I mean, just completely ballistic out of nowhere. When a girl asked him to calm down, he said okay, and then turned to me and called her names. I was completely dumbfounded and speechless at this point when he handed me a card with a shirtless man covered in snakes on the cover and told me to reach out if I am ever interested in renting an affordable room. Pretty sure I would have ended up in his crawl space. Story 4. My wife and I just had a child and went shopping at the Charlotte IKEA. I am a people person, so somewhere along the way I struck up a conversation with a shopper, a random lady of a similar age to us. She had a baby with her, so we related. She was oddly interested in me and my wife and wouldn't leave us alone. Eventually, she is talking about her family and pulls up a picture on her phone. I kid you not, she was photoshopped into a random family picture. My wife freaked out silently, and I picked up the red flags big time. Eventually, she was talking about going on vacation together. I've never found my way out of an IKEA faster. I hope it's her own baby. You know, this is a super haunting thought that didn't even cross my mind at that time. At the time, she was super kind to the baby when we saw her interacting, and I guess in our haste, we rushed out and I never thought of it. My wife is fairly understanding, tries to find the best in people, and is very anti-violent. On our way home, she asked me to go through the training to get a concealed weapons permit. It freaked her out so much. Story 5. I went on a date just a couple of weeks ago. I texted the guy for 2 or 3 weeks before we decided to go out. He seemed like the perfect match for me. We had the exact same sense of humor and liked a lot of the same things. I genuinely liked him a lot over text. The first date was just a quick sit-down at a coffee place. Immediately, the vibes from him were off. I don't even know why, but I just immediately wanted to leave. We said hi to each other and were waiting in line, and he started talking suggestively to me. I told him before the date that I hate any sort of PDA. Like, I don't even really like to hold hands in public. I am a very private person. We ordered and sat down, and he constantly made suggestive remarks about my actions. Fixing my shirt? Somehow I was doing it to get him in the mood. Drinking out of a straw? Somehow I was doing that to get him in the mood too. I steered the conversation away from it every time he brought up something dirty, and he would kind of half answer and go back to it. At one point, he actually told me that he would stand up right now, but couldn't because he had a woody. When we left, he walked me to my car. I knew he was doing it because he wanted to kiss me, so I quickly said, "Talk to you later," and slipped into my car. He was just standing outside my car and trying to talk to me, so I let the window down just a bit. He said, "Oh, you escaped." I just laughed and was like, "Haha, yeah." My car was blocked in for a minute because there were people behind me, and he just stood there the entire time. That was the absolute creepiest date I've been on, and I've been on some bad dates. Story 6. On a beach in Hawaii, another young couple sat by us, and we started making small talk. The dude reveals that they have been robbed of everything and only had their tickets home in their name. It felt BS from the drop, but I offered to buy the four of us some snacks in case they were actually hard up. So the guy and I headed back to the shop area, except he kept wanting to go to another shop, not the one right by the beach. Okay, maybe that one down the street is cheaper. We get to that one and he still wants to go somewhere else. I said no and headed back to the first one. He was annoyed. In the first one, I grab some treats and then he insists on paying and pulls out a bunch of cash. Red flag, as he said he was robbed and left with nothing. After we rejoined the group, I announced that we need to get ready for a dinner reservation. Pretty sure the dude was looking to rob me and got mad when I didn't take the obvious bait. They seemed annoyed, like we were refusing a cash prize or something. Story 7. When I was 18 and first started driving, the 35-year-old male rent-a-cop for our apartment complex would sit in his car, parked right next to my designated parking space every single night. If I were out late, he'd block my path to the apartment while interrogating or lecturing me about the terrible things that can happen to pretty girls when they stay out late at night without a boyfriend to keep them safe. This went on for months. He'd randomly leave notes and weird little trinkets on the hood of my car. He freaked me the heck out enough to report him several times to apartment management. The security company busted him out one night when I was gone for the weekend. He pounded furiously on our apartment door at 2 a.m. My mom said he looked so alarmed that she thought he was going door to door to tell people to evacuate due to an emergency. Once she opened the door, she said he was in such a panic state that he pushed past her and made a beeline for my bedroom. He started crying and telling my mom to call 911 right away because he had a terrible feeling that something had happened to me because she knows better than to stay out this late. I've told her 100 times what kinds of things happen to girls like her late at night. My mom got him fired and filed a report with the sheriff's office, and he got fired, but he still sat outside our apartment every night waiting for me. When my older brother got paroled from prison, I told him how the creepy little jerk had scared the crap out of our mom and me. People can say what they will, but vigilante/prison justice was the only thing that was effective in breaking his obsession with me. That message was finally loud enough to stick, and I never saw him again. Story 8. I was 8 or 9 months pregnant with our first baby. We had just moved into a new apartment, and I was alone when the internet service guy came to hook up our box. He was a bigger guy and seemed nice enough. I was talking to him while helping him try to find the right cables. He chatted with me and asked me a lot of questions. He seemed excited, I guess, really high energy. He was making eye contact and being pleasant and engaging. My husband came home about 20 minutes into the installation, and the dude's whole demeanor changed. The guy seemed annoyed and ticked off now. My husband is really chatty, and the guy would barely speak to him. He wouldn't make eye contact with either of us. It was weird that the change was so immediate, like a switch flipped. That's when I got uncomfortable. Why was he so excited to be alone with a hugely pregnant woman? and why was he so mad when my husband came home? That has stuck in my mind for years. I have known people in my life whose childhood was preferable treatment by a single mother and others with very toxic fathers, and in their adult life, they both prefer to socialize specifically with women and shut up around men. Keeping that mentality divorced from an in-residence service job may be tough, and I would imagine this dude might need to just be in another profession. Story 9. Back in the days of MySpace, I used to strike up online conversations with strangers there, mostly when I was deployed and looking for some socializing with folks who weren't also in the military. A few times, after chatting for a while, we'd swap phone numbers, but I never had any intention of meeting any of these people in person. There was this one girl who seemed cool at first, but a couple of weeks after swapping numbers, she started to get kind of clingy, and I got a serious vibe that she wanted to be more than friends, and I just wasn't up for that. I was about to take a trip to the coast with friends for a long weekend. I told her I probably wouldn't have time to talk at all while I was gone. That was the beginning of what I had hoped would be a gradual pullback until ghosting her. I never told her where I was going. Heck, I didn't know myself. My friend said, "Let's hit the beach this weekend." I said, "Sure, you drive." I didn't even know what city I was going to be in, let alone the exact locations. And then this girl that I'd been chatting with, who I'd never met in person, showed up at the beach while we were there. It freaked me the heck out. She wouldn't tell me how she knew where I'd be. She just kept saying she thought it would be a fun surprise. Luckily, I never saw or heard from her again after that. But I definitely had some conversations with my team leader about how one would go about getting a restraining order if it proved necessary. Story 10. When I was a freshman in college, I had casually mentioned to this guy in one of my classes that my roommates and I couldn't get our TV to work with the cable channels in the dorms. He said he was pretty handy with that sort of stuff and offered to come look at it. I said sure, it couldn't hurt. And I also knew he lived in the same dorm as me, on the same floor even. I gave him my phone number so he could shoot me a text when he was on his way. He stopped by later that day, sat down, and fiddled with the TV a bit, then eventually told me he couldn't figure out what the issue was either. I said, "No worries, thanks for trying," and I just kind of expected him to head back to his room. Well, he did not. He just sat there on our floor like he lived here. My roommates and I didn't really know what to do, so we just kind of continued with our day as if he wasn't there. Every now and then, he'd respond to something one of us said or laugh at a joke one of us made. It was really weird and uncomfortable. After maybe an hour, he finally gets up and says he has to leave. Not even 5 minutes later, I got a text from him. "Hey, I really wanted to hang out more. Do you want to come to my room? Please don't bring your roommates, though. I don't like having a bunch of people around." Nope. I read that text out loud to my roommates, who had similar reactions. I didn't really know what to say except, "Sorry, I can't right now." For the rest of the year, he'd send me good morning texts and kept trying to talk to me and invite me over. I was smart enough not to put myself in a position where I'd be alone with him, but still too naive to just block his number and tell him to stop being weird, so I had to put up with that for a whole year. He was such a weird dude, and he looked like a thumb. Glad I dodged whatever that was. Story 11. I was at a work event many years ago, and people were drunk. This was literally the welcome dinner for interviewees for the residency. We had a non-clinical research guy associated with the med school who basically came for the free meal and drinks. He was probably about 55 years old. At one point, we're all drinking bourbon. Just the docs and some existing residents, no interviewees. We're discussing vacation destinations, and the guy says, nothing beats the beaches in France, because if they're over 19, they're topless, and if they're not 19, they're also bottomless. This was followed by the most epic pause I have ever seen. Literally everyone stopped and looked uncomfortable, and the whole circle just scattered. One of our faculty members made a complaint to the med school. Not a year later, he was raided for having inappropriate pictures. Story 12. About 20 years ago, I was at a conference and was introduced to this guy. I shook his hand and instantly felt uneasy about him. I told my wife that I didn't want her alone with him, and I told some other female friends that he made me uneasy. I couldn't figure out what it was about him, but I had this feeling in my stomach. Since I couldn't justify my feelings, I had to be cordial with him, but always at a distance. Later in the conference, one of my female friends said she needed to commute back to our hometown, a few hours away, and that she was going with the creeper. I told her that I would take her, but she said that since I didn't need to go back, it wouldn't make sense, whereas Creeper was heading back anyway. I couldn't outright say that this guy was bad news. I didn't have any reason other than my gut feeling. I had her call me as soon as she got home. She arrived home safely. At the conference, I intentionally stayed away from him. Everyone else loved the guy, and I started to feel like a real piece of crap for hating him. The conference ended uneventfully, thank goodness, but I couldn't shake my disgust for this guy. Weeks later, he was in the news. He was busted for possession of inappropriate pictures and videos. Everyone reached out to me asking how I knew he was a sleaze, and honestly, to this day, I am not sure. I don't ignore that gut feeling anymore, though. That's for damn sure. My wife told me to let her know if I ever feel this way again, but I have not experienced it ever since. Story 13. I was walking to the club with a mate after we got off the train, and there are two ways to get there, either Main Street the whole way or through two back streets. Being half drunk and lazy, we decide to take the back streets, which are dark as heck. As we're halfway through the first alley, some random dude pops out of the darkness and starts walking and talking with us. He's eating something from a plastic bag, but I can't see what it is. I am getting sketchy vibes, but my mate is oblivious to it. As we get to the second alley, we have the choice to go to Main Street again or keep going through the alley. It's a bit brighter here, and that's when I look at the guy, and he's eating raw freaking meat from this bag. His face is covered in meat chunks, and again, he looks sketchy. So I say to my mate and this random guy, I have to stop at a shop on the way. Let's go to Main Street. My mate was like, nah, it's quicker this way. And I gave him the let's get the heck out of here stare, and he finally understood. The random person was trying to get us into the next alley, but I just cut it off coldly. Not sure if we would have gotten essayed and offed in the next alley, but I am still alive, so that's a win. Story 14. I was bartending at a dive at 4 p.m. and this guy around 60 or 70 years old came up to order a beer and a shot. I never met him before, and he barely said anything outside of the order, but something about him freaked me out. I went to hand him his change, and this voice was screaming in my head, "Stand back! Throw it at him! He's gonna grab you!" I reached as far as I could to keep a distance between us. He aggressively grabs my hand anyway with both of his and tries to pull me toward him. I told him to let go and stupidly allowed him to remain in the bar. He ends up buying these 21-year-olds drinks all afternoon. I checked on them while he was out smoking, and they said, "Yeah, he's creepy, but we'll take a few more free drinks." Cool, I will keep an eye out. He made a point to personally walk the drinks over to be helpful. I cut him off and banned him within the hour. He tried to show up a few weeks later on a date with a well-dressed, age-appropriate woman. They appeared to have just left a nice dinner or show. When I saw him at the door, I walked up and pointed his name out on the 86 list to our 4-pound door guy. The man tried to jump over the door guy to fight me. About a month later, I pull up to work to see the SWAT team is around the corner, which is crazy in our virtually crime-free city. The whole 9 yards, yelling on megaphones and using tear gas, all directed at this tiny apartment above a shop. Imagine my complete lack of surprise when I find out it's this dude. Apparently, he'd just been released from prison after like 25 years and had been on a spree of posing as a professional photographer/model scout online. He would convince women to meet him in order to essay them on video. All the comments on the news article were like, "This guy scammed me out of my retirement account back in '94. Story 15. In freshman year of college, I had just moved in. I met some dude on my dorm floor who was roommates with one of my buddies. This guy didn't seem to have anyone to hang out with, and I often saw him alone around campus. I thought, why not? It's freshman year, and it's not incredibly easy to make friends, and besides, he's the roommate of one of my good friends. I saw him sitting at one of the larger tables at the coffee shop, sat down and said, "Hey," and he immediately asked if I would be interested in seeing his furry collection. Before I had a chance to say no, he spun his laptop around to show me furry corn. In a public coffee shop with no shame. Now I know why no one spoke to him. It didn't help that he wore a fedora and trench coat everywhere either. He ended up being expelled after inappropriate exposure and acts at that same coffee shop about a month later and making inappropriate comments towards most of the girls who walked by. Story 16. I was seeing a guy, and it was our fourth or fifth date, and I told him I wasn't interested in having any intimate relations unless I was officially dating someone. Anyways, afterwards we were cruising around in his car. The next thing I know, we are in a random isolated cul-de-sac neighborhood, and he parked and whipped his Johnny out, and I got so frightened because of the look he gave me, and it made my blood run cold. I told him I was super uncomfortable and wanted to go home, and he got all pouty and put it away. When I got home, I blocked him on everything, and that was that. Eventually, I deactivated all my social media accounts too. About a year later, I moved across the country and made new social media accounts under silly names because that's just how I am, and tell me why. He somehow found my accounts and messaged me and wanted to reconcile. Story 17. I was raised in a cult, and sometimes I get really strong vibes off of people. It seems that other people don't notice, or maybe they're just being polite. He was the son of our cult leader when he visited our chapter. I would stare at him. He just looked extremely cruel to me, like waves of malice were pouring off him. He was aggressive with his wife and kids, and the cover-up of that, as well as other things, led to the cult breaking up. Story 18. Just a couple of days ago, I was fishing on a small river in the mountains. It's a hike to get down where I was, and there is an area of flat rocks where small pools of water and streams come through. I was looking under rocks there for crayfish to use as bait, and this guy apparently came down shortly after I had and was watching me. He literally said, "I've been watching you for a while now." He seemed nice, and as we talked, he wanted me to leave with him to go to a different spot where the fishing was better. Then he said he knew a boat ramp down the river that he could show me. Then he said I could come look at his property for a spot to hunt in the fall. The entire encounter was wild. He wasn't big and intimidating, and I feel I could have easily overpowered him, but the entire time, it was me leaving with him to go somewhere else. He also said that college girls come down to this spot to swim in the rapids. I went back to fishing, and he started walking on the rocks going upriver, and when I lost sight of him, I made a beeline up the mountain back to my truck. Then a few weeks later, they linked these encounters to bodies found across different states in similar rough, forested trails. It turns out he was hunting people and offing them. That's a scary thing, and I think some people would be willing to leave with someone who is friendly and also has a shared hobby or something. And if I did get in his car, no one would know where I was. When I told my wife about it later, she freaked out a little because she didn't even know exactly where I was. She knew I was out fishing but had no clue about the location. When I got back to the hotel, we both talked about our day, and she told me all of her concerns. I could have fallen and broken my leg jumping around on those rocks, or had a heart attack or stroke. I am going to be better about that moving forward. That guy has probably had success with this before. Serial offenders have been caught because of people reporting events like this to the police on non-emergency numbers, just that they say it seemed so suspicious and abnormal that they felt compelled to contact, even if nothing bad actually happened. When it happened, I wasn't even thinking of that. I was just thinking, dude, I don't know you, and I am not from around here. I am not going places with you. I should have at least gotten a picture of his truck. But it was also like 95 degrees, and the hike back to my truck was brutal, and I felt like I was going to pass out when I got back. Story 19. A friend's acquaintance was at the bar with us one night, and after a few drinks, he started saying that biologically younger women were the most breedable. He tried to justify it with some talk about fertility rates or something. I am not sure, but it was really uncomfortable. This was back in 2013, and it was probably the first time I'd ever heard the word breedable. A bunch of us called him out on it, and we got into an argument. He kept insisting it was just biology. Eventually, we told him to leave, but he kept trying to stick around. When we headed back to my place, we actually had to physically block him from following us. It got tense with some shouting and shoving, but it never turned into a full-on fight. The friend who knew him didn't defend him at all once he started talking like that. Honestly, I don't even think I knew his name that night. We never heard from the guy again, but sometimes we still bring up the story in disbelief over how badly he dug himself into a hole. That was about 12 years ago now. I probably couldn't even pick him out of a lineup. Story 20. A new young guy was hired. He was maybe 25. I was 20 at the time. I am pretty chesty, so I am always kind of aware that I need more space than most when I am in office environments, and I try to keep my distance in general. Well, on his first day, from the moment we met, he stared it down while talking to me. But it seemed really awkward. I can ignore that. It's whatever. It's his first day. Maybe he's nervous. But my oh crap, this person is a complete creeper moment happened near the end of his first day. I was in a very small copy room, and instead of waiting for me to get out, he pushed in and stood with our fronts flush against one another before I could even say anything. And like he lingered and was very obviously wooded. I avoided him after that. If anyone is dealing with crap like that now, please report it. I wish I had reported it, but I was the only woman in an all-male office. I was young and dumb, and I felt like no one would believe that some new guy would have the audacity to do something like that on his first day. And we were alone with the door closed, so I knew he'd probably claim it didn't happen or that I am misrepresenting what happened. Story 21. I was looking for a daycare for my two youngest kids. The place I was considering was in the perfect location, on the way to work but not far from home. The price was fair, so I went to tour it. All the kids looked happy, the owner was pleasant, but I just had a funny feeling. I had nothing to base this feeling on. I just knew I couldn't send my kids there. 2 months later, it was shut down because the owner's son was essaying a girl. The owner knew about it and didn't turn him in. Never ignore your gut, people. Story 22. When we were at a house party in university, this guy showed up completely uninvited. I've never spoken to him, but I had heard he, only a few nights prior, locked a girl in a room at another party and refused to open the door until she kissed him. So, when he showed up to this party covered in blood, which he said was a nosebleed, and decided he could still show up covered in blood, a few male friends told him no, and he was insistent and wouldn't leave, then tried to walk past them into the house. They had to physically shove him away and threaten him before he left. He stood outside for about 20 minutes looking in the window from the street. He still randomly messages my female friends from university on Instagram and Facebook to this day, and that was nearly 6 years ago. He works in a hospital now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets caught violating patients or something. For the record, we informed his current employer of his previous behavior. He still works there. Story 23. I am a weekend barman putting myself through university in a small town in New South Wales, Australia. A Department of Main Roads crew was staying upstairs, and one guy on the crew gave off dangerous respect me or get hurt vibes. Over the past few years, I got to know him fairly well as his crew came to town to work on a remote road leading to the Jenolan Caves resort. I always gave him way, kept my distance but still acted like mates. He was much older than me, and there was something about the way he watched everything that made me wary. 10 years later, my instincts were proven right when he was on the news, being arrested for offing a number of backpacker hitchhikers. He would pick up hitchhikers and essay them before dumping them in deep bushland. They searched the Jenolan Caves road for a year but never found any bodies there. The others were found in a state forest south of his house. I think some of the missing backpackers are still somewhere down that road. He died in prison 3 weeks ago. Not many people were upset. Story 24. I was on my way home from a friend's house around midnight. It was raining, and barely anyone was on the road. I pulled up to a red light, and someone pulled up next to me, trying to get my attention. He told me my license plate is loose. I was like, okay, thanks. He was like, no, it's really loose. It looks like it's about to fall off. Now my instincts are kicking in. As if I am going to pull over on a deserted road at midnight while it's raining to check my license plate. So I continued my journey home. About 20 minutes, and as I am pulling up to my house and about to get out of my car, I see this man pulling onto my block behind me. I got the plate number. I went into the house and told my dad and called the cops. Turns out it was a rental car from Ohio, and there was a report of something similar a few nights prior. Story 25. I started a new job. One of the guys who was in the training class was off. He was around 40 to 50 years old. He would bring his tabletop figurines to work and pull them out and play with them at lunch break. It smelled really bad. He also made some awkward jokes about burning the building down and how much he hated his wife. After we finished with the training, we happened to be sitting near each other, and even though I had zero interaction with the guy before, he randomly turned towards me, completely unprovoked, and said, "If no one else was here right now, I would hurt you," then tried to laugh awkwardly. I literally turned around away from him and ignored him. Later, I spoke with a manager the first chance I got, and she told me someone else said something similar about him. He didn't show up the next day. Story 26. I used to manage a dog boarding and daycare facility. I was in charge of hiring. This guy came in for an interview, and he answered all the questions well, had good experience, and wasn't outwardly off-putting in any way. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling of wanting to be away from this guy. And I am a big guy. I was at least a head taller than he was, and at least 50 to 80 pounds heavier at the time, so it wasn't physical danger. Since I couldn't pinpoint it, I ended up taking him on a tour of the facility. One of our regulars was the sweetest Rottweiler that ever lived. She was a certified therapy dog that visited sick children at the hospital. That dog took one look at him while on a playgroup with other dogs, ran over to the fence and started barking at this strange interviewee like Cujo. She never barked at anyone else before or after. I never figured out what was up with that guy, but suffice it to say that my sweetest regular dog hates him was a good enough reason to get rid of his application. Story 27. I had just gotten off a flight to Atlanta and called a taxi. For reasons that escape me to this day, I decided to sit in the front passenger seat instead of the back like a normal human being. The driver, a guy in his 20s or 30s from Florida, didn't seem to mind. "Oh, cool. Yeah, you can sit up here," he said. We start talking, and he tells me about how, in his opinion, women in Atlanta are stuck up and that he prefers the women back home. Then he says he's not much of a drinker, but more of a smoker. I say I am not much of a drinker either, and his eyes light up. "I've got some with me right now. Want to try it?" Now, this is where I'd like to point out that I was making questionable decisions that day, because for some reason I said yes. He hands me something and says it's already ready to go. I take one hit and immediately realize this was a huge mistake. The feeling that hit me was unpleasant, to say the least. I must have looked worried because he quickly tells me it's synthetic and legal. Meanwhile, my body is buzzing and my brain is screaming, "Never again." I try to distract myself by making conversation, but he starts telling me a story about taking a relative with a developmental disability to get some action and even acts out the scene. At this point, I am wondering if I've accidentally gotten into the wrong kind of taxi ride entirely. Finally, we get to my destination. He gives me his card and says to call him for my trip back to the airport so we can hang out again. I politely say, "Sure," even though I have zero intention of doing that. But when I try to go inside, the front door is locked. He's still there watching. "Everything okay? You need me to wait?" he asks. I say yes, pretending I just need to get in through the back. I walk around the building, and he eventually drives off. Unfortunately, my little act of going through the back door set off the alarm, and the police were called. I managed to get inside before they arrived, and thankfully no one ever asked me about it. Story 28. I was 18 and a pest control guy was inspecting our house. When I went to get into my car for work, he lingered outside and asked me where I was going and where I worked. I told him where I worked, thinking he was just some friendly dad type of guy. And a couple of hours later, I saw him enter the fast food place I worked at and go use the bathroom. We made eye contact on his way in, and he didn't order anything and rushed out. I called my dad and told him to make sure that guy never came to our house again, and he told me he took care of it. He's a good dad, my dad. Story 29. I was working retail back when physical media was still a thing, and we had a guy come in wanting to see if Avril had released any new music. The dude was in his 60s at least, but still owned every piece of media she had put out. So as he's flipping through the CDs, he's announcing to me and anyone else within earshot that he owns that CD, and that one, and that one too. And he did this for every single CD, even repeats of the same albums. So he finally gets to the end of the stack, proudly announces to the world that he still has everything she's ever released, and then leans in towards me and says, in the most stereotypically pervy old man voice you can imagine, You know, she's a very naughty little girl. I can just tell. Story 30. I was doing a job walk for a tender for a construction project. There were 2 or 3 units that were closing and opening up as one big retail space. Currently, one of the spaces is a young kid's jewelry and fashion store. The maintenance guy who was showing me the spaces gives me a tour of the full place. And then, towards the end, we are shooting the crap about work, and he points to the sign on the front of the store with 3 girls on it and says that he's taking that home when the store closes. I ended the conversation right there and never sent a price. Story 31. I had a stalker. I was 18. He was a pool guy in his 30s. I was mowing the lawn one day in my coveralls, actually my brother's coveralls from the Navy. I was alone mowing the lawn, and he asked for directions, which was common back then, especially where we lived. I noticed he sat at the stop sign for several minutes watching me in his rearview mirror. For a year after that, I found him following me around. He'd pop up at grocery stores, malls, etc., always ducking down and trying to hide from me. It was super creepy. I told my parents, and they didn't believe me. My friend Willie, who happened to be a big guy, was with me one day. I had told him about this guy, but he'd never seen him. So the weird guy is following me through the grocery store, and then we leave, and there he is driving by my house. Willie went out there and had some words with that guy. Keep in mind, we were teenagers, and this was a grown man. That guy stopped following me after that. Story 32. I was with a group of friends playing disc golf at a busy local course. Just a bunch of dads having a good time. And one of the dads brought his 6-year-old son. As we're playing, a man in his mid-30s emerges from the woods and walks directly up to our group. He wore all red, was barefoot, and didn't break eye contact. He said he didn't know how to play and asked what the rules were. He has no discs. As my friend begins to explain, the man in red immediately cuts him off and asks if we all have kids. My friend says he does, and Red turns to him and asks why they're not there. Where are the rest of the kids? Taken aback, my friend gives a non-answer. There was a horribly long pause. Then the man says, "Why not?" Stares for a while longer, and then turns and walks back into the woods. Story 33. Honolulu around 2015. I was casually talking to a security guard at the front desk in my building. A man whom I had never seen before interrupted us to ask me to come up to his apartment. I told him I was busy. He asked me again to come up to his apartment. I declined. He then gave me his business card and said he was running for a local office as a Republican. I told him I probably didn't agree with his stance on marriage equality, and he said rather conversationally, "Oh, so you're a Nazi?" I think I said, "Excuse me?" He said that women are more likely to be essayed because men are allowed to marry men now. That didn't explain the Nazi comment to my satisfaction. I asked him to explain his logic, and he said that if I were to come up to his apartment and spend the night with him, I would be more likely to claim that he had essayed me because, and then my phone rang before he could finish. I answered it because this man was clearly insane. The security guard was stunned speechless. I saw the man only one other time. In the elevator, a few weeks later, he asked if we had met, and I said, "Yeah, you called me a Nazi." This raised eyebrows amongst the other people in the elevator. He looked ever so slightly sheepish. I got off at my floor. Story 34. My Boy Scout troop about 20 years ago had a group of dads who were the leaders of the troop. Out of nowhere, this guy showed up wanting to be an assistant scoutmaster. He was extremely creepy, even to 12-year-old me. I vividly remember all of the parents immediately having their guards up. They let him partake somewhat, but it was always in a limited role, and he was never allowed to be one-on-one with him and a scout alone. Nothing ever happened that I am aware of, but I vividly remember it all of these years later. Looking back, it was pretty advanced for the parents to be so vigilant in 2004 before the whole PDF file thing became mainstream. Story 35. I went out with this guy. Let's call him Harold. Right after a breakup from my most serious relationship. Harold was nice, very innocent and safe. He offered to pick me up, planned the date down to the minute, and even asked if I wanted him to grab anything on the way. He decided to take me to a restaurant in Alabama that has a little zoo in the back. A weird choice for a first date, but all right, it could be fun. He came to pick me up, hopped out of his truck, and was immediately too short for me. I am 5'2", and I prefer my men taller than me, which isn't usually hard. He opened the door, let me pick the music for the drive, and then my motion sickness kicked in right away because he scared me with his driving. We got to the restaurant, and I was struggling to eat, so I focused on the conversation instead. He told me about his family, asked about mine, and we walked through the little zoo checking out the animals. Then he suggested we go to his work friend's dad's house to swim. This was the moment I should have said no, but I didn't. He'd mentioned swimming earlier in texts, so I assumed it'd be at his pool or a public one, and I'd brought a swimsuit just in case. We got there, and I was nervous about being in a swimsuit around people he knew, but I didn't. We got in the pool and were tossing a football around. He kept commenting on my throws, so I gave him a few pointers. Then it got weird. He told me he didn't have a nipple on one of his pecs. I am pretty sure my face said, "Huh," loud and clear. He repeated, "I don't have a nipple on this side. It got cut off when I was little." How do you even respond to that? I just laughed it off and threw the ball back. Later, I got out of the pool and was sitting on the edge with my legs in the water. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You like my pecs? I can shake 'em." Then he raised his arms and shook himself vigorously. My jaw hit the concrete. About 15 minutes later, I asked to go home to feed my cat and got out of there. We were Snapchatting a few days later when he said, "I should probably tell you something." I braced myself. I am a virgin. I am saving myself for marriage, but I have no problem pleasing you. Again, how does one respond to that? I don't remember exactly what I said, but that was about a year ago, and we haven't spoken since. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.